100 years ago, Mexican hunters massacred every last bison, tens of thousands slaughtered, until total extinction in 1900. But in 2009, something bizarre happened. The grandsons of those same hunters spent $8 million to port just 23 bison from South Dakota. Why resurrect the very beasts their ancestors celebrated destroying? Here's the shocking truth. Without bison, both land and people died. Native communities lost height from starvation, child deaths spiked 16%, and families ate horses and old clothes to survive. The soil turned to concrete. 70% of prairie dogs vanished. Ancient springs dried forever. Even now, a century later, these communities earn 25% less than others. The curse continues. But can 20 animals really reverse 100 years of devastation? Can they resurrect 136,000 acres of dead earth? Restore extinct plants? Bring water back to dry springs? What happened next shocked even the scientists. Watch to the end. You won't believe what these one-ton giants accomplished in just 10 years. The answer will change how you see nature forever. By the late 19th century, the North American prairies thundered with life. Massive bison herds, 60 million strong. But what happened next would haunt ranchers for generations. By the mid-1800s, profit-driven hunting for pelts, slaughterhouses, and government policies triggered a catastrophic collapse. By 1870, numbers crashed to 5.5 million. By 1880, just 400,000 survived. In merely 80 years, their population plummeted from 60 million to 395,000. Yet this was only the beginning of a darker chapter. The continued persecution of indigenous peoples who depended on bison, combined with government-sanctioned commercial hunting, designed to weaken the tribes, drove these giants to near extinction. By 1889, only 541 individuals remained. By the early 20th century, just 300 bison roamed freely in the entire United States, confined to a handful of reserves and protected areas. My great-grandfather witnessed this destruction firsthand, shares Roberto Martinez, whose family has ranched these borderlands for 5 generations. He told stories that haunted him until death. The year bison disappeared, in 1882, the land itself seemed to die. Ranchers celebrated at first, thinking more grass would grow for cattle. But within a decade, the grass didn't multiply, it vanished, the soil turned to dust, springs dried up. He said killing the bison was like ripping the heart from the prairie. South of the border, the situation proved equally catastrophic. In colonial Mexico, bison became prime targets. Hunted for food, trade, their hides, and even their tongues. By the 19th century, hunting had evolved into industrial-scale slaughter. The ciboleros, specialized hunters across generations, pursued bison relentlessly, pushing ever southward. By 1870, hunters faced empty prairies. By century's end, not a single free bison remained in northern Mexico. The golden age of nature's prairie engineers had ended, ushering in an era of dying pastures. But the true cost of their absence would only become clear decades later. The 20th century's agrarian reforms fragmented the prairies into small ranches and fields. When cattle farming proved unprofitable, people turned to irrigation, further destroying the delicate ecosystem. Without bison, the landscape underwent a sinister metamorphosis. Vast grasslands morphed into impenetrable thickets of mesquite, creosote, and honey locust. Invasive species that cattle wouldn't touch. These woody invaders sucked moisture from deep underground, leaving nothing for native grasses. Soil erosion accelerated dramatically. The dense biological crust that once absorbed rainfall now repelled it like concrete, while heavy rains stripped away the thin, fertile layer, 0.2 to 0.4 inches vanishing annually. Over decades, this reduced pasture productivity by 60%. The biodiversity collapse was catastrophic. In 1988, researchers discovered a prairie dog colony complex in northern Mexico spanning 136,000 acres. Imagine an area larger than Chicago, teeming with underground cities. Due to habitat loss from bison absence, that metropolis shrank by 70% in just 2 decades. Prairie dog density crashed from 25 per 2.5 acres to merely 2. By 2000, my family's ranch was dying, Roberto continues. 4 generations of knowledge couldn't save it. The land had become something alien, not the prairie my ancestors knew. We tried everything. Different cattle breeds, irrigation systems, chemical fertilizers. Nothing worked. The soil was dead. The land was dying, and conventional methods couldn't save it. That's when conservationists proposed something radical. Which region are you watching this video from? Drop your location in the comments below. We'd love to know where our Tech Motion community is tuning in from today. In 2009, after 3 years of negotiations, permits, and heated debates, 23 giants arrived at the Llanos Biosphere Reserve in northern Chihuahua. The transport itself was an engineering marvel. Custom trailers with reinforced steel, veterinary teams monitoring vital signs, a 36-hour journey through customs and checkpoints. I led this project from conception to release, recalls Maria Gonzalez, the conservation biologist who orchestrated the entire restoration. When we unloaded those first bison, the community was split. Half the ranchers saw salvation, half saw disaster. 3 bison escaped in the first month, causing panic. 1 bull charged a pickup truck, making national news. We almost lost political support entirely. The challenges were immense. Fencing costs exceeded $2 million. Local communities feared property damage and disease transmission to cattle. Drought hit hard in year 2, and critics said they'd wasted millions on a fantasy. But then something remarkable happened, Maria continues. Despite the drought, green patches appeared wherever bison grazed. Springs that had been dry for decades, including one on Roberto's land that his grandfather remembered, began trickling water. It was as if the land was remembering how to live again. Between 2009 and 2018, with continued American conservation support and $8 million in funding, the herd grew to over 200. The transformation was beginning, but nobody anticipated what these animals would accomplish next. First, they walk, constantly. On massive legs supporting 2,000-pound frames, bison cover up to 1.8 miles daily, equivalent to 30 city blocks. Each hoofprint applies 24 pounds per square inch of pressure, precisely calibrated by evolution. The critical difference between cattle and bison lies in their behavior. Cattle, domesticated for 10,000 years, have lost survival instincts. They move predictably, standing in one spot until it becomes a mud hole, creating compaction like concrete with 0 water penetration. Bison remain wild, constantly moving, hyper alert to threats. They break the soil crust just enough, creating 2-3-inch depressions that capture rainfall without causing erosion. The difference is measurable. Cattle-grazed land absorbs 0.5 inches of rain per hour. Bison-grazed land absorbs 3.2 inches, a 640% improvement. When Mexican monsoons deliver 4 inches in an afternoon, that difference determines whether land floods or flourishes. I've studied both animals for 2 decades, Maria explains. Watch them for a season, and you understand why bison built the prairies while cattle destroy them. It's not the animal's fault, it's about evolution. Bison and grasslands evolved together over 10,000 years. They're partners, not just grazers. This mechanical action triggers a cascade that transforms entire ecosystems. An adult bison produces 50 to 59 pounds of manure daily, essentially 50 bags of premium fertilizer, perfectly distributed across the landscape. Since bison consume exclusively native grasses, their dung delivers concentrated nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in ideal ratios. Colorado State University researchers measured something extraordinary. Soil nitrogen levels increased 4% in bison grazed areas versus untouched spots. Plant biodiversity doubled within 30 years. But bison's selective grazing creates something even more valuable: habitat heterogeneity. They crop some areas to golf course height while leaving others untouched, creating a patchwork supporting 3x more species than uniform grasslands. The transformation on our land has been miraculous, Roberto shares, emotion in his voice. Places where nothing grew for 20 years now have 40 different plant species. My grandfather used to describe the prairie's diversity. I thought they were fairy tales. Now I'm seeing it with my own eyes. The bison brought back plants we thought were extinct. Their behavior becomes even more fascinating when you understand their daily rituals. A one-ton giant suddenly dropping to its knees, rolling onto its back, legs kicking skyward like a playful puppy. They roll constantly. For parasite control, cooling, social bonding, and apparently pure enjoyment. Maria documented one particularly impactful wallow. A massive bull rolled in the same spot for 10 minutes, creating a dust cloud visible from a mile away. 6 months later, that bare patch had 47 plant species where there had been 3. It became our most biodiverse square meter. The mechanism reveals nature's ingenuity. Bison collect thousands of seeds on their woolly coats, up to 85 species documented on a single animal. When they roll, they simultaneously clear invasive weeds and deposit collected seeds. These wallows become water-catching basins, perfect nurseries for plant establishment. Research shows a single wallow can introduce 500 plus new plants annually. Multiply that by hundreds of wallows, and you're witnessing ecosystem reconstruction at massive scale. But the most profound impact comes through their relationship with smaller engineers. If you found this video fascinating and worth watching, comment 1 below. If not, be honest, comment 0. Bison maintain mosaic pastures, varied grass heights essential for prairie dog survival. These rodents require visibility for predator detection, impossible in tall, uniform grasslands that cattle create. Prairie dogs are ecosystem engineers extraordinaire. Their burrows, extending 15 feet deep and 100 feet horizontally, create underground aqueducts channeling water through otherwise impermeable soil. They increase soil nitrogen by 92%, accelerate nutrient cycling by 300%, and their selective foraging prevents any single plant species from dominating. The black-footed ferret depends entirely on prairie dogs. One ferret family consumes 250 annually. Burrowing owls use abandoned burrows exclusively. Swift, foxes, hawks, eagles, badgers, and 200 plus species rely on prairie dog towns. At first, I wanted the prairie dogs gone, Roberta admits. They were pests eating grass meant for cattle. Now I understand. They're the prairie's foundation. Without them, the whole system collapses. My grandfather knew this, but we forgot. The evidence is undeniable, yet implementation faces massive resistance. Standing in Mexico's recovering prairies, watching dust plumes from rolling bison, you witness time reversing. These aren't mere animals, they're ecological architects, reversing decades of destruction with every step, every wallow, every carefully grazed patch. When humanity erased 60 million bison, we didn't just lose magnificent creatures. We unraveled nature's masterwork, triggering cascading extinctions we're only beginning to comprehend. Yet those 23 pioneers sent to Mexico prove that some catastrophes are reversible. Every returning prairie dog, every ferret family saved, every spring flowing again demonstrates our capacity for redemption. Sometimes healing requires humility, admitting our mistakes, stepping aside and allowing nature's ancient engineers to reconstruct the world we nearly destroyed. The thunder is returning.